Well, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you find yourselves on this lovely day. It's such a pleasure and an honor and blessing to have this opportunity to have a conversation about a special month that we celebrate here, Women's History Month 2026, with these brilliant, beautiful minds. We are going to just engage in a conversation about the importance of Women's History Month and talk about some really important nuances when we think about Women's History Month as well. Without further ado, I'll just introduce myself and then we will go around the room and learn who we'll have the chance to engage with. I'm Dr. Stephanie Kruzmark, President of Star King School for the Ministry. And I will hand the mic over to Reverend Dr. Gabriella.
Thank you. And I'm Reverend Dr. Gabriella Lettini, and I serve Star King as Chief Academic Officer and Dean of the Faculty. And also I am Aurelia Henry Reinhardt Professor of Theological Ethics. And I just say this title this time. I mention it because this is a chair that was started by a group of women to make sure that Star King always had a feminist scholar on the faculty. And I will be serving as the facilitator of the conversation with my colleagues. And I'll pass it to Professor Thea Bashir.
Thank you so much. My name is Taya Mashir, and I've had the great delight to teach at Star King since 2014. I serve as assistant professor of the practice of organic multi-religious ritual, as well as associate director of our Center for Multi-Religious Studies. And I am honored to pass the mic to Kiana Lazenby.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend Ia Kiana Sakil Lazenby. I am a PhD student finishing up at Graduate Theological Union, and I've worked for the past, I think, 3 years now as an adjunct faculty at Star King, and I taught Introduction to African Spiritual Traditions, Eco-Womanism, as well as African spiritual traditions from the Sacred Mother Divine Feminine perspective. So I'm really excited to be here and just look forward to our conversation. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Pravina.
Super excited to be here. I am Dr. Pravina Rodriguez, adjunct faculty at Star King, also co-editor-in-chief of Springer's Journal of Dharma Studies. And I do a whole bunch of things right now. I'm editing a volume which focuses on the great goddess in the Hindu tradition. I'm super excited about that, and how this text, this mythic text, is relevant not just to women but to various other aspects, eco-despair, war, so on and so forth. Really happy to be here and to talk to our wonderful, brilliant, colleagues here.
Thank you all. I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation. And I'll start with a first general question that can get us going. And the question is, why do you think it is important in 2026 to still honor Women History Month? And how do we honor it in a way that pays attention to intersectionality, to women's differences of location and concerns nationally and globally? And I would invite to start Professor Thea Shear.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Gabriella. When I consider Women's History Month in this current moment, my scope widens to the very first time I honored Women's History Month in a way that was potent and meaningful for me. It was in 2003, and in protest of the US bombing of Iraq, on International Women's Day, I gathered in front of the White House with my activist literary sheroes and had the wild experience of being arrested with some of the people that had most shaped my understanding of the importance of standing up for women's rights worldwide. I was in a small holding cell with Alice Walker and Maxine Hong Kingston and Harry Tempest Williams, and sitting next to Amy Goodman in the paddy wagon and with Starhawk chasing behind us. And that moment changed my life as an activist and as a ritualist, and kind of lit a fire under me for my own work toward intersectional women's rights. And fast forward to this past Women's History Month, just International Women's Day, I'll say, March 8th of this month in 2026, on the heels of the US again dropping bombs on women and people in that sacred region. And my attention was in conversation with one of my dearest friends who lives a few hours from Tehran in her ancestral homelands. And being in conversation with her as the US is bombing her people and her lands, and she's also standing up for the rights of women as a part of the women life freedom movement in Iran, and sitting with the mind, if you will, of what is it like when women are being attacked from all sides? What happens when those of us who are bringing life into the world in myriad ways, not only in physical ways, are not valued, not honored as sacred? And for me, as an ecofeminist, understanding earth as sacred, and the rights of earth as connected to not only women's rights, but the rights of gender marginalized people of all kinds. I kind of hold this tension of the importance of Women's History Month in the larger context of really working intersectionally for the rights of all gender marginalized people. Mostly I feel this wild combination of hopeful and heartbroken. Heartbroken that we're here yet again, still in this time, needing to have conversations of why it's important to honor women's wisdom and the wisdom of gender marginalized folks, to honor the rights, the knowings, the bodies of we who are at impact of patriarchy and systemic oppressions, and yet holding so much hope for the wild, sacred creativity, the showing up in the streets with an ethic of care, the creating in new ways that I see through my friends' work on the grounds in Iran, creating in realms of the sacred, working to reclaim goddess traditions in that place, through the work that I see among my friends and literary activist heroes who are now not the folks that I have held on pedestals, but the folks that I'm getting to weave with. I'm most inspired in many ways by the work of my students here at Star King and elsewhere, seeing the radical rituals, the much needed liturgies that are being created, the willingness to speak truth to power, not only on the streets, but in congregational life, and in a variety of movement chaplaincy settings. I feel just landing with this sense of great hope and great heartbrokenness. How are we still here? And also, yes, we are here, and we are making change through our lives, through our language, through our love, and how we're showing up with each other every single day, not only in March.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Thea. And I would like to invite Professor Kiana to continue to bring your contribution, please.
Thank you. When I think about this question, I always like to begin with myself and the work that I'm called to do in the world. And even if I at first didn't want to do it, right? So in my academic journey, my professional journey, as well in my personal life, I've always lived at the intersection of beauty exists among multiple traditions, multiple faiths, so forth and so on. So I thought that that was my path, as an interfaith minister, as an initiated Ifa priestess, right? Like that was my path, finding, uniting with the commonalities of all of these traditions, and exploring our differences from the point of acceptance, right? And I remember I took a class when I was at PSR with Bishop Yvette Flunder and Refuge in the City. And what our only assignment for the class to conclude the class is we had to preach a sermon at her church. And so I had came prepared and with my notes of what I wanted to say, and I was dressed for the occasion, like I was ready. And then in the midst of me sitting in the audience, Spirit began to speak to me and say, daughter, I want you to say this. And I was like, but wait, I'm prepared to say that. You know what I mean? And so Spirit was like, well, when you're being authentic, that's when God is being expressed, right? When you're being authentic. And so I got up there and I shared. And then after my share in the audience, three different elders came up to me and shared with me, women are your ministry. And I was like, that's nice. Thank you. And then someone said it again and then again. And I was like, okay, that there's something there. And so the culmination of my thesis project, I studied programs that served women who were impacted by the carceral systems. And in that work, it came to me that these women believed that the God of their understanding didn't love them, right? And so out of that, born a women's interfaith ministry that I lead, right? And then I think about in my service of these women, and I believe that the relationship between student and teacher, or student and minister, or student and priestess, it's always reciprocal, right? So as much as I'm learning from them and they're learning from me. And I thought about just what are some kind of the emerging thoughts around power, around agency, around authority, and how it's important at an individual level that women identified folks know and understand that they have these things, even if they can't see it. And with their power, their own agency, and their own authority, you can create change where you are. And so for me, it always begins with the individual and then it broadens out to the family and broadens out into the community. And so it's like a domino effect. And I'm speaking of this in Women's History Month because, yes, I'm grateful that we have a month. And I know and believe that women should be celebrated every day. Because to add on to what Professor Taya was sharing, I believe that okay, we live in a patriarchal, capitalist, white supremacist society, right? That's a known, that's a given. And so if we were to lift the voices and the communities and leaders of matriarchal societies, we solve challenges for the whole. So we're not thinking of just of ourselves. We're not thinking just of our children. We're thinking of, we're thinking of men. We're thinking of non-human species. We're thinking of Mother Earth, and we're thinking of a sacred relationship, a sacred hospitality relationships that exist, with us all, where we're interconnected and interdependent. So, yes, we must address these things on an individual level, familial level, community, so forth and so on. And I always believe that it starts with yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kiana. Thank you very much. And Dr. Pravina, would love to hear your perspective.
My colleagues have articulated everything so beautifully. But I really liked what Kiana said, because it kind of matches, it matches the journey, my spiritual journey, and the slow um, unfolding of your path, and in which direction uh, your research or your work or your life takes. And it's not always sudden. And I also liked what she said about women should be honored every day. So I believe in everyday spirituality, because I forget birthdays, I forget important anniversaries, I forget literally everything. So for me, it's like, if you really want to be spiritual, or if you really want to honor someone, it has to permeate, and it has to be at a level where people are respected and cared for on a day-to-day basis. However, it seems like there are gender injustice. There's gender disparity, and there's a vast difference that we see in the world, whether it's economical, whether it's political, in so many spheres. And therefore, I think it's good to have a women's history, honoring women's histories, or honoring women in a particular month of the year, whether it's March, whether it's December. Right now, it's March. And I think that this will help us see and envision how we can steer the current discourse narratives, or center women, women histories, the labor that they do, and so many other various aspects that are basically sometimes erased, sometimes absent in the dominant narrative. And I think that if we have a space where we can engage conversations, when we can where we can focus on honoring women, whether it's in March or whether it's in any other month of the year, I think it allows us to look, to self-reflect, to look at our society, to in retrospect, and then to see how we can now change and move things in for a better future. And I think where we are right now, we're in 2026, and even now we have to have conversations um, like these, where we are focused on honoring women. And this itself is telling. It's telling of the current situation. The situation in which women's bodies are politicized, in which women's bodies are neglected, abused, so on and so forth. So I think this platform, or this way of honoring women, is really important.
Thank you, Dr. Pravina. Uh, President Kurzma would like to share something as well.
In thinking about the beautiful wisdom that you all have shared, I had an opportunity to speak with Reverend Dr. Pamela Hancock just a few days ago, and hopefully she won't mind me sharing, but she really hit on a few points that I think are worth contributing to the conversation. And one being the acknowledgement that women's experiences do differ based on their locations, what is going on in the cultural, spiritual, political, economic realm, and just acknowledging that women cannot be generalized. Our experiences cannot be generalized, and that we have to. There's such importance in acknowledging and recognizing that in terms of where we are positioned. And then, secondly, I think that not to get too political, but it's interesting to me, living in the United States, that we have yet to elect a female president, and yet the countries that we point our finger at as not adhering to our version of democracy have acknowledged as that women's leadership, that there are many countries that are led by women's vision and wisdom. And I think we have a lot to learn from that experience. And third, I would just say that it is interesting to me that, as many of you have pointed out, that we have a month to acknowledge all of women's history, and that women's history has started, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, and that there is so much to acknowledge and discover and build awareness across the generations. And it makes me question and wonder how we women of the academy, to get back to something that Kiana mentioned, how we can permeate our knowledge and our wisdom to future generations, how they can tap into the beauty and brilliance of our legacy, and how we connect our work in the academy to the community. And I think that Star King does a phenomenal job at ensuring that our students' knowledge that they are able to gain is able to be immediately applied to their local, their regional, their national, their global communities. Yeah.
Thank you. And if I may, I would like to add a small thing. As I was listening to all this beautiful nuance contribution, I was thinking of the title of a book, of one that I think is probably a role model to many in this room, Angela Davis, and the book is Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And he speaks so clearly about the fact that, I think for so many, what we have, even the imperfect realities we have now, were the results of struggles by whole communities through history in different contexts. For me, Women's History Month has always also meant that, to connect with the reality that there were struggles that I honor, that generated some what of the gifts in our lives of today. And there are struggles that we have to continue to do, because those dimensions of freedom, or basic elements of justice and fairness, are never secure in different parts of the world. And so we are part of that history of struggle. And as we thank people before us, and we also, I think, get strength by remembering what they have done. And so just for me, a reminder that the element of struggle is always part of what we are called to do. And I also want to say, for the way I connected since I was a child with Women's History Month, there is the element of the connection between labor struggles and women's rights that was always very important. And also, growing up in I grew up in Italy in a very patriarchal society. Women's rights were still minimal in many areas, even as I was a child. And also there was a almost total lack of women in spiritual leadership. And so, speaking as a theologian, Women History Month is also about remembering all the women of different faiths and spiritual backgrounds that brought beautiful contribution to the world and the community, and often had to struggle for it, and that lifted up, that are especially in spiritual tradition that are pretty patriarchal and male-oriented, that lifted up different ways of engaging with the sacred and the divine. So that's, for me, as always, a part of this celebration. Before we move to the other question, is there anyone that feels inspired to add something to your answer? Good. But maybe I'll move on and then you can integrate as you answer another question. And what are your emerging concerns for women in the spiritual and political moment? And how do you address them in your work? And I would like to start this time with Professor Kiana.
Thank you for your question. Um, I want to talk about, so I have a women's interfaith ministry titled Divine She, and it's a spiritual space where we offer programs, services, where we support women in self-actualization, meaning that we help you to cultivate, utilize, first identify if you don't already know what they are or where what they are, your spiritual gifts and talents, and how you relate to the divine in a way that resonates with you. And we're intentional. We offer a monthly inspirational service where we talk about um, just the divine feminine in spiritual traditions. And then we always end with a ritual that you can take with you to practice on your own. And so, and as it relates to this question, I do believe that the rise of the divine feminine is on the forefront because you have women that within their own respective traditions that are seeking knowledge, awareness, and understanding about the feminine aspects of their God in their specific tradition and how to use those attributes to empower themselves and to empower their community. So the world itself is just off balance. It just is, right? Both spiritually and politically. And so through this work, and women again self-actualizing, I can even see the changes within our own communities and within our families and the larger world, um, how a shift is already happening, so the powers that be as it stands, you know, they have to fall, right? And something has to be birthed new in its presence. So it happens simultaneously at the same time. It doesn't happen one or the other. As something is falling, something or deconstructing or imploding on itself, something else is being rebuilt. And this is where our imaginations, and our hope and our love and our joy, brings forth something new that's inclusive, right? Because inclusivity is so important in all of this, you know, and honoring, respecting and honoring and revering our differences and knowing that the power lies there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Pravina, what would you like to
Yeah.
contribute to this question?
So the thing is that my work is I'd like to speak about the volume that I'm editing because my work specifically lies in the academic community and engaging the divine feminine in an academic space. And I 100 and let's say 199% agree with Kiana that the divine feminine or the feminine principle is on the rise. So this volume that I'm editing, like I said, it's based on a myth which comes from the Hindu world, in which there are several goddesses, not just one, and the narrative or the myth articulates an existential crisis between a merchant and a king who have sort of lost, they have lost their family, they have lost their kingship, and now they meet a sage, and then what the sage does is points them to the divine feminine and says that, well, the reason why you are being disillusioned or why you are suffering and the cause of your suffering, your losses, whether it's financial and the pain and the emotional despair, is because of the goddess. And it's because she creates the universe in such a way that it must progress, and it progresses spiritually um, through these existential crises where people realize that this moment is not exactly enough for me, and does not suffice me, or does not fill this vacuum in my heart, and hence I must progress. And my progression is dependent on the progression of the entire universe, because we are interdependent, and we are naughty as in not naughty, but we are knotted together, knotted. We are entangled, and this entanglement is interesting because you see, right now we're talking about women's histories and honoring women, but at the same time we are seeing a whole bunch of things. We are in a war, we are in an ecological crisis, and all of these sort of intersect in such a dangerous way that if we try to tease one thing out, we are not able to tease it out. And what this myth does, it shows you that, well, the problem, or the what we are looking at, the solution to the problem is through a specific way, and that is through the engagement of day-to-day reality. So you don't leave your job, your day-to-day job, and you don't go to the Himalayas and meditate, but you deal with the turmoil that exists in your world, and then you integrate it and bring it to a higher level so that it benefits all of society. And the first chapter of this volume is there's a submission by Raj Balkaran, who does a comparative analysis of the myth of Genesis, along with the myth of this text, which is called the Devi Mahatmyam, the glory of the great goddess. And he says that, well, you have the Genesis myth, in which there is a masculine principle, and the masculine principle has supported the world, the universe, but it has its limitations. And now we have the feminine principle, which is in this which is depicted in this myth, and the feminine principle behaves in a different way, and integrating that in societies will bring a balance, and will restore this delicate, this situation that we are in, this mucky situation where we see things are just going crazy. So this is the argument that he makes, and it's very interesting because you see he's looking at how the feminine principle operates, and how it is holistic, how it is interested in elevating, and it's not vertical, but it is horizontal. And he makes all these very interesting comparisons, too large to mention, but that's just something I wanted to share because I think it's relevant to the conversation, and also to what Kiana mentioned, because I really think that what we have right now is a crisis of how we can look at ourselves as societies, and how we can integrate the other, whether the other of another nation, of another gender, so on and so forth. And how can we integrate and see the other not as the other, but as a part of us?
Thank you. And Professor Taya?
I'm so moved by what has been shared here, and there are a few strands that I want to speak into. For about 2 decades, I devoted my spiritual leadership, my resource creation, my attention to making space for goddess, body, earth inside of Jewish tradition, which is the most recent spiritual tradition of my ancestors. And in that work, training and ordaining clergy, really evolving a Hebrew priestess movement, I felt the way that deep transformation was happening. in making space for the sacred feminine in that context. And yet, I ultimately reached a wall where I was no longer willing to center a patriarchal tradition to be making space for something that simply is already at the center. And a shift happened for me in my spiritual life, in my leadership commitments, in how I move, to kind of put goddess, which for me is an expression of sacred feminine, at the center of my life, of my work, and to no longer be curious about what that negotiation with patriarchal tradition, I'm less interested in that conversation than I was for a long time. And I'm most curious about what happens when we truly put, I'm going to say goddess at the center. Your language may be different than that. For me, that means not only goddess in deity form, but the isness of immanent divinity, of the presence of the sacred inside of me, inside of you, in the space between us, in every conversation, in each daily action, and to understand spiritual practice, spiritual attention, spiritual leadership, not as something we outsource, but as something that we insource, that we needn't be in a conversation around being legitimate in the eyes of systems that are still creating and enforcing oppressive structures, but rather what happens when we're in a dynamism and emergence, a trust from kind of bottom up, from grassroots, from listening to how communities define themselves rather than how others in quote unquote leadership define them. And so for me, a shift has happened just in my own practice and spiritual commitments that has goddess more fully at the center. And I want to, from that place, speak to a strand around specificity that President Stephanie, you spoke in through the inspiration of Reverend Dr. Pamela Hancock, which is the importance of and the pathway to inclusivity in many ways through specificity. And this is something that I have learned the most about from my beloved co-conspirator of blessed memory, Ibrahim Baba, provost of Star King, who was an embodiment of gender expansiveness. And I would love to offer a reading that speaks to this, and also just kind of name really clearly that for me and so many, that when we're speaking about Women's History Month, we are 1,000% speaking about Women's History Month for trans women, cis women, non-binary folks, gender expansive Women's History Month. And also, I love working with time. And so for me, Women's History Month is not only about the past, but like, what is Women's Now Month? What is Women's Future Month? Like, what is the ancient future now of how we're tending to these strands? And so I'll offer here a reading called Bodies Matter, that for me holds both an incantation and a prayer for Women's History Month that invites us to be bold in naming what we are attending to intersectionally. And here we go. This is from Sheikh Dr. Ibrahim Baba Farajajeh. This was written over 15 years ago, and so some of the language would be different now. Bodies matter in the way in which the dominating culture has organized its meaning and conferred and confirmed identities. We have been led to believe that just rich, white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, temporarily able bodies matter. That these are the perfect bodies. These are the bodies that really matter. But all bodies matter, not numbers, not statistics. Bodies matter, not ball-gowned and tuxedoed and academically attired bodies matter, but just plain old bodies matter. Dead bodies matter, dying bodies matter, infected bodies matter. Disabled bodies matter, decolonizing bodies matter, decolonized bodies matter, bones and braces bodies matter, reservation bodies matter, wheelchair bodies matter, deaf bodies matter, blind bodies matter, poor bodies matter, injectable drug using bodies matter, commercial sex workers bodies matter, ghetto bodies matter, projects bodies matter, trailer park bodies matter, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning bodies matter, FTM bodies matter, MTF bodies matter, genderqueer bodies matter, two-spirit bodies matter, colored bodies matter, working class bodies matter, children bodies matter, women's bodies matter. Mental health bodies matter, imprisoned bodies matter, mixed heritage bodies matter, public assistance bodies matter, addiction bodies matter, immigrants bodies matter, prisoners bodies matter, bodies that speak languages other than English matter, HIV bodies matter, cervical cancer bodies matter, breast cancer bodies matter, changing bodies matter. Hypertension bodies matter, sickle cell bodies matter, prostate cancer bodies matter, diabetes bodies matter, depression bodies matter, homeless bodies matter, refugee bodies matter, Muslim bodies matter, Earth's body matters, bodies matter, all bodies matter. May it be so that all bodies, that these bodies, that specific bodies, that our bodies, that yours and my bodies, that women's bodies, trans women, cisgender women, non-binary and gender expansive bodies matter. And the prayer that I hold inside of this is that we not be afraid in our devotion of attention and our action to be fully intersectional and deeply rooted in the specific, not worried about leaving out, because the cascade of inclusivity, when we get specific, is where the vitality lives. When we are willing to be our vulnerable full selves. And for me, that's at the heart of what's possible during Women's History Now Future Month.
Thank you.
That was really beautiful. Can I just add something? Not just human bodies. I think that even non-human bodies,
Yes.
the earth body, the sky body, the sun, all of these matters. And I think that when we think of sentience, we are quite anthropocentric. We think of just as though we are the only ones who exist. We are the only ones who have bodies. But we are literally walking on an earth, and that earth matters. And look at what we're doing to it. And I think that poetry, art, and the language that we use can really, really shift perspective. Recently, Sheikh Hamdan, who's the Crown Prince of Dubai, he changed the label for women from housewives or homemakers to generations shifters,
Mm.
not shifters, generation shapers. And I think that that move is really, really important because language, the language that we use in North America is quite violent. It's even kill two birds with one stone is quite violent. I'd rather use feed two birds with one bowl. This is something that I came up with because I was like, no, this I don't want to kill any birds. So I think that this poetry, art, literature, all of this can really help us bring attention to things that are being neglected, erased, and absent.
Mhm. Thank you, Dr. Pravina. Yes, as I was hearing this beautiful litany, I also was reminded of the fact that, we can use Women History Month in the everyday as a constant reminder that there are not disposable beings of any kind. And what we are dealing with is now with all these, the forces of capitalism, the forces of authoritarianism, the class exploitation, racism, homophobia, transphobia. These are all interconnected in many ways, and by the fact that all based on the idea that some beings do not matter, and some beings are there only to be extracted something for the benefit of the few. And it's really like this celebration for me is always a reminder that we say no to that, and that's really important. President Kurzmark, anything that you would like to also add?
You know, I am taken back again by the brilliance that is being shared in this conversation and thinking of ways that I can contribute. And a question that came to mind for me, especially in the role that I currently embody for Star King as president, is that when we look across the theological schools in the US and Canada, only 1 in 10 presidents represents the women's identity, however you define. And it makes me wonder, what harm are we causing by excluding or not intentionally recruiting more women leaders to lead these theological schools, and how that trickles down in terms of how one shapes the school structure, the systems, the values that are placed within not only how the organization functions, but within the learning. And so that is a question that came to mind after this brilliance that is being shared. And I think that what I feel empowered to do is there's actually an annual meeting of these theological schools coming up in June in Chicago, and how I can contribute that perspective and point of view within my realm, being invited to the decision-making table, that advocating for women's wisdom to be invited and encouraged and intentionally nurtured and welcomed is so important to the future of theological education in general. Yeah.
Yes. And Dr. Stephanie, also going back to the theme of honor in history, is also that what even the situation that we have now, for instance, in the Association of Theological Schools, in our theological work, I mean, just in the last 30 years has changed so much. So it's very important that people don't think that there was not struggle. And even this situation of, you know, imbalance and if not injustice, was not hard won. And so that's important, because I think there were schools where women were not teaching. They were not real scholars. Considered. And so I remember when one of the first years as Starkin, I was teaching a course in women's history, no, women's studies in religion for the Graduate Theological Union. And I always remember this young student telling me, "Oh, well, I'm taking this course, but I don't think most of the material is not really relevant because we don't have any more issues now." And I remember, yeah, I would like to ask her that what she thinks in 2026. But it was surprising to me to hear a young adult say something like that. And it spoke of the lack of history and or the culture-induced amnesia in so many contexts that deletes the history of the struggle and tries to present a different reality. I think we are about to close, so I wonder if there is any more words from any of you as the Spirit calls you.
I would love to close in prayer of some kind. And before I do, I just really want to affirm what has been shared most recently. Um, to me, marks the way so much change has happened in recent decades, and so little change has happened in recent decades. And that tandem, I've just seen it so clearly in the women's spiritual communities and now the gender expansive spiritual communities that I'm a part of. And yeah, I feel a tenderness at the both end there. And I just offer a prayer that however we understand spirit to be in our connectedness and in our distinctions of connection with the sacred, I just hold a prayer that we each individually with our ancestral and spirit teams and together in our sacred work find ways to keep honoring the wisdom that we each hold, trusting our knowings and letting the guidance that comes as a part of women's history and whatever other histories inform us, to really shine through and be carried on. And I don't feel like I hold the whole prayer for the group. This is my prayer, but I welcome more prayers, and I feel grateful to be in this space of dreaming into being new ways together.
Thank you.
I join you in that prayer. And also, I would like to add that the inclusion of, you know, women's wisdom, which has somehow been neglected, which has been passed on at dinner tables, which has been passed on from generation to generations through families, through methods of care. I pray that they regain focus.
Mhm. Beautiful.
Thank you. I would like to offer that we lift Mother Earth, and if we seek to, we seek and strive to have a better relationship with Mother Earth, that some of the things that we know that exist that are harmful will disappear.
Mm.
Yeah, so I want to lift that. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for your beautiful, powerful, thought-provoking contributions, and um, just express my joy of having been working with you for a few years, some 6 months or so. But it's just been a pleasure to be with you in this space. And thank you, Dr. Kruzmas, for thinking about organizing this.
And thank you all for the beautiful wisdom that you have shared in this conversation. May it permeate across the technology lines of communication and inspire others to let their voices and wisdoms be held and heard. Thank you.
Yeah.